Hi everyone, welcome to the first video in a new series called How I Edit. The goal with these videos is to show you a no-frills look at exactly how I edit my photos from start to finish. These videos will be uploaded every Wednesday and will include both landscapes and wildlife photos and include editing in Lightroom and sometimes in Photoshop too. If that is something that interests you, please consider subscribing to the channel. But for now, let's jump right into the first image. I've got an image here today of this lioness with the 3 cubs, and I like the image, but the raw file is suffering from a few things I don't like. It's very warm and it's very bright in certain areas. It was shot a long time ago, so the contrast on the camera back then, the low dynamic range, has rendered this image very contrasty. So I'm going to go into Lightroom here. I'm going to change the profile to Adobe Standard. And I'm going to cool down the image a little bit just to try to get rid of that very, very warm light. I think the camera compensated too much for the light there and made it too warm. So I'm going to drop the white balance there. I'll leave the tint for now until I've done some more adjustments later. I'm going to zoom into the image and I just want to look at the noise first. Now, always remember, turn off your sharpening if you want to really have a look at the noise. You can see on the image, if I sharpen, you can see all that gray in there, and that's actually caused by sharpening. So I always turn the sharpening off to start with, and I'll just throw in a little bit of luminance noise reduction there. I will come into lens corrections and just remove any chromatic aberration. I don't worry too much about the profile corrections unless the image is suffering from heavy distortion or very bad vignetting, but for this image there's no issues there. Okay, so I'm going to work on the exposure. I like to drop the exposure down a little bit to open up the shadows, just to make the image a little bit softer. And then I'll normally bring in some whites just to bring some contrast back. And let's just drop that exposure there again. So that's looking good. I think in terms of composition, there's a few things I don't like. I don't like this left-hand lion there. And I feel like this one on the right, although it's separated in terms of not touching the side of the line there, I feel like a nice portrait crop will work well here and possibly a nice 4x5. So I'm just going to go into the crop tool. I'm going to change that to portrait, and I think something like that, and maybe a little bit closer in there. So I think something like that will work very well. As you can see, we've cropped out that line just on the leg there, and we've got rid of that section there. And I think the focus here is the lioness with that 1 cub. I think the composition works well. So I'm going to leave it like that. Might add a little bit more space on top. There we go. So now I want to work on the dynamic range a little bit on this image. I feel like it's still a little bit dark in the shadows, although I like the overall exposure. The shadows are a little bit dark, so I might play with the blacks and the shadows here. And then I might drop the highlights a bit. So you can see that we've already softened up the contrast quite a bit, and I'm liking the quality of the light a little bit better. It's a bit softer. Let's up that exposure a bit. Now, what I want to do is I feel like the lion and the background are blending in a little bit together. Obviously, the background's nicely blurred, but the colors are just blending a little bit together. So what I want to do is possibly desaturate some of those greens, and then I want to make this color on the line a little bit more red. So I'm going to come into my HSL here. I'm going to click this little adjustment tool. I'm going to click and drag on the line and pull down. I want those colors of that line to be a little bit more towards the sort of orange side. So you can see there's a before and after. You can see it's a little bit more orange there. And then the greens in the background, I'm going to desaturate. So I'm going to click on those greens, desaturate those greens. So you can already see how we've separated that line from the background and just made the light quality a little bit softer. I think I'm going to warm it up a little bit. Maybe around about there. And then what I want to do is, I feel like the front of this lioness is too bright. It's grabbing a lot of attention. So I'm going to come into the masks here and choose a radial gradient. I'm just going to drop that over the front of the lion there. Just a very subtle change just on the front. You can see just a slight darkening there, very, very slight. And then I feel like this leg as well is very bright and it's distracting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose luminance range and I'm going to select that area. So now I can see everything in red has been selected. If you want to learn more about these masks, I do have a two-part series of videos that goes quite far in depth into this, into this subject. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to intersect that with a brush. But first, I just want to clean up the selection. I just wanted to only really target that very, very bright area on the leg there. So I'm just going to adjust that. I can show the luminance map, so everything in red will be part of that luminance selection. And then I'm going to intersect that with a brush, and I'm just going to brush over the area that I want to darken. And maybe just on the face here a little bit, and maybe on the cheek there. So then I'm going to come to the exposure, drop that exposure down a little bit, maybe the highlights, just to soften that area up a bit there. And then I think the thing I want to do next is I want to try a little bit of color grading. I want to add a touch of blue into the shadows, very, very subtle. I'm going to bring that down. I just want to target the area I want those blues to go into. Something about like that, and then I'm just going to raise that a bit there. It's very subtle, just adds a very soft sort of touch to those shadows there. I'm going to then work on the eyes. I'm taking a brush. I just want to add some clarity into those eyes there, just to make them pop a little bit. Not too much. And I think I'm going to do them in the little cub's eyes here too. So I'm just going to paint there. And then I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to add a little bit of exposure and a bit of clarity. Just to help pop them a little bit there. Is a before and after. It's very subtle. Maybe I can use a little bit more exposure. Something like that there. That looks good. I think then I want to possibly add a vignette to the image. So I'm coming down to effects. So you can use this post-crop vignetting. I get quite lazy sometimes when I edit and I just use this. You can use a radial gradient, but I'm just going to demonstrate this post-crop vignetting first. So what I like to do is drop the amount to 100 just so I can see exactly where the vignette is falling. I'm going to bring this midpoint in. I'm going to feather it so it's a nice soft vignette. And then I'm going to bring it back up a little bit there. Something like that. I'm going to brighten the little cub's face. I think through the vignette it got lost a little bit. I'm going to bring that up. And brighten that up a little bit there. And that's looking good. I think the vibrance and saturation doesn't need a lot of work, but I'm just going to play around with it. Remember, vibrance increases areas of saturation in colors that are not that much saturated. And then the saturation slider will increase saturation regardless of what the colors are doing. So it'll just increase saturation in everything. So the vibrance is basically a smart saturation. It protects the overly saturated areas and then increases the saturation in those areas that aren't too saturated. I'm going to come and just drop the white balance there a bit more. Maybe add a little bit of contrast. Maybe a little bit more shadows. And then what I think I'm going to do, I will want to add a bit of a softening effect to the blacks. So I'm just going to come into the presets here and I'm going to use, I normally use these black fade presets. If you watched my dark and dramatic video, you'll know all about these. If you haven't, go check that video out. There's some presets there that you can get. So I think I'm just going to use one of these. I think just the black fade. And I'm just going to adjust the amount here. I don't want it to be affected 100%. Just a little bit like that. And then I think this image is nearly done. I'm just going to play around with this vibrance. One thing I also like to do sometimes is come down into the calibration tab and just go to the blue primary channel and increase the saturation. It's a nice way to just add some saturation to the whole image, but it's only on the blue channel. Might come back into this color grading and add some more blue into the shadows. Might drop these shadows a bit. Just increase that there. I think the image could do with a little bit of clarity just to add some nice crunch to the image. Texture is fine. And I think this image is nearly done. I think it might be a bit too saturated there. I think now I'm going to zoom in again, and I just want to work on that sharpening. I'm going to normally use it about 60 on the amount there. The radius, I always take it down to 0.5 just to give it the finest sharpening possible. And then always hit down the Alt button and click on masking and drag it up. You'll see everything that's in black is not going to be sharpened. So you can see everything in white there will be sharpened. You don't necessarily want to sharpen an out of focus background. You just want to sharpen the details there. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let's just go through these panels. The tone curve, I don't think I'm going to do much to it. Maybe just bring out some more brightness there. Increase the amount of the exposure, and maybe just drop the whites a little bit. I feel like those whites are getting a little bit too bright. I normally tend to edit my images a little bit darker than normal. Just come back into this tone curve. I'm just going to go back to this black fade preset again. Just want to fade those blacks ever so slightly. And then come back into this vignette, drop the vignette. And I think that's looking pretty good. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. I like the exposure across the whole image. It's nice and moody. I mean, that's what we started out with. So you can see it's very bright and very sort of warm and green. But now we've dropped those colors a bit, added a bit of mood, and just made it look a little bit better. So I just want to add in another radial gradient on this lion. I feel like that area is slightly too dark. There's a lot of interest there. Just going to subtly add some brightness, and then maybe just go back to the mask I created on the lion and just drop that down a little bit there. And then maybe just add one more radial gradient on the face just to brighten that up ever so slightly, because that obviously is one of the main objects in this image. So I think that's looking pretty good. I think the only thing bugging me now is the ground. The ground here looks a little bit sort of purple. I'm just going to go back into this HSL. I'm just going to the purple here. I'm going to increase that. You can see some of the purples are getting extremely saturated there. So I'm just going to desaturate that a bit, and maybe the magenta. That just helps simplify the image a little bit more. Getting rid of some of the colors you don't necessarily want in the image just helps simplify the image. So now what I could do is, there's a lot of flowers on the face. Obviously I'm not going to clone that out, but I could clone out that little flower there. Going to come to the healing brush, and I'm just going to get rid of that little flower on the face there, next to the face. So that basically sums up this image. This is again the before, and that's the after. I'm liking the mood here. And if you want to learn more about color grading in Lightroom, check out this video next, where I show you everything you need to know about color grading.